to you. Well, confirmation now from the Home Affairs Ministry that there's going to be a review of 3 separate acts which all relate to different aspects of migration into South Africa. The 3 acts are the Immigration Act, the Refugee Act and the Citizenship Act. You can see how they all work together, except that maybe they don't. But will this really have any impact on the situation on the ground, particularly when 2 political parties and many South Africans have said they want changes to the way that foreign nationals are working here? Gary Eisenberg is an immigration attorney at Eisenberg and Associates. Gary, good afternoon to you. I imagine it's been a little while since all 3 of these acts were reviewed at the same time. Is there a need to have a proper wholesale look at all 3 of them now?
I'm waiting for the Minister, with respect to him, to say something sensible. All the reasons he's come up with to amalgamate these 3 acts, the Refugees Act and the Citizenship Act and the Immigration Act, have been specious and have had no real foundation, no rational foundation to them. And I'm wondering, what is the truth? What is the real policy reason the Minister wants to do this amalgamation exercise now? It escapes me.
Does it matter if they're 3 laws or if they're 1 law? I would think in some ways these all relate to each other. Does it matter how this is done? Does it have any real sort of bearing in the end?
I have to tell you that I don't know of one democracy internationally who has pulled this off successfully. In fact, there's been a purposeful endeavor to keep these areas of administration separate. They all do separate things. Refugees, citizenship applicants and immigration applicants fall into 3 different policy areas, all administered through different systems in the bureaucracy. In most countries it is that way. In South Africa, I have nothing as an attorney against a single act. It may save paper, it may save resources, but I'm really looking forward to the revolutionary product that can streamline the law and can ensure that the Department of Home Affairs implements it properly. I mean, since I can remember, since the Immigration Act, for example, came in 2003, and the new Citizenship Act in 1995, and the Refugees Act, the department has failed to implement them properly. So my question is, and it's a question that posed directly to the Minister, try and convince me that a single act consisting of all of these pieces of legislation will be implemented in a far more efficient and corruption-free manner than the department has to date. I'm looking for a reason to be in agreement with the Minister. I have no reason to date to add my agreement to what he's trying to do.
Gary, isn't this really, I mean, we see the frustration on the ground, and I understand the frustration. There are millions of South Africans who believe that foreign nationals have jobs that they would have otherwise. Now, there's a lot in common with what's happened in other countries. You could argue it's similar in some ways to dynamics in the United States. You could argue against that too. But we see this issue around migration into Europe, for example. The argument goes that foreigners are taking our jobs. And I mean, that's a very crude way, perhaps an offensive way of putting it. But isn't there something in that? I mean, isn't that what the government needs to deal with? And doesn't it need to use the law to resolve that problem?
Well, the only problem is, I mean, as an attorney and as a researcher, I've never seen any document containing an empirical academic analysis of the facts and figures which would supply the Minister with the ammunition you've just referenced, that foreigners are taking the jobs away from South Africans. I would have thought that foreigners create jobs for South Africans, that they create value for the fiscus, a net value for the fiscus. If I'm wrong, show me the study. A lot of what the White Paper 2017, I think it was tabled in the Zuma cabinet, Minister Motsoaledi was a member of the Zuma cabinet, you will recall, as Minister of Health. All of this was discussed. And in the White Paper, it was stated that foreign nationals are adding to various kinds of burdens in South Africa, responsible for crime, clogging up the health system, and all these other ills that foreigners are supposed to be responsible for. But I've seen no empirical analysis which has arrived at that kind of a solid conclusion. I've just seen studies arriving at the opposite conclusion, that foreigners are good for the country, not bad for the country.
I mean, this is, again, it goes back to what the facts are. Now, the Labour Department actually doesn't know, government doesn't know how many foreign nationals are working and receiving an income in South Africa. That means that people go with what they see. And what they say they see is that there are millions of Zimbabweans. Now, as far as we know, there aren't millions of Zimbabweans. There may be hundreds of thousands of Zimbabweans. This is really the issue, isn't it? Is that we seem to be working in an area where there are facts and there are perceptions. There might be vast differences between those two things.
Well, there are, but the yardstick of truth is really factual analysis. And until we arrive there, until a sufficient number of academics have crunched the numbers and have determined what that empirical data looks like, we don't really have an argument. We have political noise. We have all kinds of anecdotes. But these are noble lives, as espoused by our top leaders in this country, without much factual foundation. And you can fool some of the people some of the time, but not all of the people all of the time. And I'm just scratching my head. Why are these allegations thrown into the air when there's very little empirical data to support them?
In a way, this may turn out to be a test of the law. Let me explain what I mean. It's a fundamental question, perhaps, around whether if we change the law relating to foreign nationals and migration, will that change the situation on the ground? And I think we are going to get a test of this towards the end of the year when the Zimbabwean exemption permit expires. If the rule of law works, then I think it's 180,000 Zimbabwean nationals will leave the country and go back to Zimbabwe. If the rule of law doesn't work, they're going to stay here, as, in fact, I think many of them did before this exemption permit was brought in. What do you think is going to happen? Is this going to be a test of whether changing the law relating to immigration actually works?
I think a very neat way of explaining myself is that old story. It's called the Laffer curve theory. It relates to tax. The higher the tax rate, the less the fiscus harvests in terms of tax revenue. The more difficult our immigration laws are going to be, the less value our country is going to extract from foreigners. There are going to be more fraudulent visas and permits in circulation. There's going to be more corruption amongst the rank and file of the Department of Home Affairs and the police services, because you're going to have literally hundreds of thousands of individuals roaming the streets, occupying positions in hotels, in restaurants, and so on and so forth, all walking home in the evening, getting public transport, and being subject to arrest. Now, can you imagine 200,000 or 300,000 people? We're talking about these Zimbabweans without any permits. This is from the 1st of January 2023, after this grace period. They're going to be really a serious, serious problem in this country. We don't have the resources to arrest and incarcerate and deport. We can hardly cope with current numbers. How are we going to legally implement a system of arrest, incarceration, and deportation of 200,000 or 300,000 people? We simply don't have the resources, no matter what the law says.
Gary Eisenberg, thank you, the immigration attorney at Eisenberg and Associates. I do appreciate the time.